And we have, welcome to the workshop. We have apologies today from Chairman Leader and Toy. Councillor Itty is with us at the moment, but he may be leaving some way through this. We kick off our workshop today with a presentation from Len Cook, who is joining us on Zoom today. Did you have a question?
Before you go on,
Yeah.
I had a discussion with Chairman Leader last night, and he really regrets he wasn't able to attend this meeting today. He is particularly interested in the item on the submission to the Regulatory Standards Bill. His meeting finishes at 1, and he asked leave of the committee for that not to be dealt with until he's able to zoom into it, please.
Okay, great. So we may have to rearrange the order at some point today so that we can make that happen. Yep. Great. So Maureen, Len, very warm welcome to you. And I will hand over to you now. I understand you have a presentation for us. Great to have you here this morning.
Right. Thanks. I'm not sure whether my slides have come through since I mucked around with them. I guess we'll find out. Share.
We can't see them yet. Oh, here we come. Yep.
Are they there?
Yep.
Oh, good. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk. My world of, I think that's okay. What I was really asked to talk about a bit is the scale of change that we're going to see in our New Zealand population over the next 20 years is quite phenomenal. And it's almost more significant than we experienced in the baby boom years. And the real difference is that during the baby boom years, from 1950 to 1970, New Zealand's population grew by about 1 million, and all of it was actually driven by births of babies. So the whole country had population growth being driven by pretty much the same cause. Now, with population aging being quite significant, for example, 45% of our population growth in the next 20 years will be people 75 and over, that we've seen a large fertility decline, so that whereas we ended up having about 60,000 babies a year around in the 1960s and 70s, our government statistician predicts that even when we get to 2070, that will be higher than what we will expect to have then. So the number of births that we've had has stayed steady at around 60,000 a year, even though the population has grown from 2 to 5 million now, or nearly 5 million, and it'll be another 6 in 20 years' time. And the third thing that we're seeing is a huge difference in the scale of migration in New Zealand. And you will have read about the massive volatility of both people leaving New Zealand and coming into New Zealand. And so those three changes are affecting each part of New Zealand quite differently. And that's part of what I want to point out. By the way, as I go through, you're more than happy to interrupt or ask if there's something that I'm not explaining very well. I think that what I call it is a population storm. And the real issue is by not thinking ahead enough, our usual piecemeal response to public policy has meant that when we get out in 20 years' time, we won't necessarily have wanted to have done the things that we're going to do. The other thing about that change in the population age distribution is that, in fact, because we'll have many more people of the retirement ages that will be having greater access to health services and retirement provision, we will end up with, and far fewer people in the workforce, our fiscal position will change quite considerably. So I estimate, and it's consistent with Treasury's forecast, that we'll probably have about a 35% gap in our tax revenue in 20 years' time compared to the things that we currently do, the population we do them for. There's proposals to change the way we measure population. The government statistician has proposing that we replace it with linking the records that the state already collects. I'm having run a few population censuses in the past. I'm sort of not impressed with the fact that the government statistician has failed to with 2 in a row. And I guess my question is, if we can't run an ordinary census, we have to be very thoughtful about the changes that we're putting in place. And the other point I'll make, and I think this is where local authorities have really got an increased role, is government statisticians really don't know most of the uses to which you put census population statistics. And if we're going to have a major change, it's going to be really important that users actually are able to be clear on what they think they're going to lose by changes and what they will actually need them for in the future. Just a wee, I guess, issue. What do we want? What do we use population statistics for? One is integrity of the state, so we can hold the governments to account. We want policies to be based on actual evidence. So, for example, as I mentioned, if our fiscal outlook is going to change, then we should be starting to hold governments accountable now for how they think about it. Also, communities themselves want to know about who's in their community in terms of the resources, the decisions that they're accountable for. And of course, we produce electoral districts, which are politically very important. So in fact, what we do have is a huge history of population structures and dynamics, which really helps us forecast ahead. And it's not just this year's census that's important to us, it's the whole history, where we can look at the scale of change, the intergenerational shifts, changes in living arrangements of households. And it's not only government, of course, business services make long-term plans. And I noticed that local authorities, of course, are now expected to identify their housing needs for the next 30 years, which will be much more complicated unless there is a much richer approach to understanding information about place and what's going on with localities. Just a little bit, if I look, and the fourth thing which I think is important to take account of is that the Maori population is now 40% of the size that the European population was in 1966. It's also got the age structure now that the European population had in 1966. And that was the peak of sort of the demographic dynamism of European New Zealand population. I think I could say that because I was sort of joining the workforce around then. And so Maori actually, their impact on the economic potential of the New Zealand population and the Pacific population is going to be greater than that of the aging European population. And in many ways, we need to be ensuring that the educational outcomes and the productivity potential of those populations play a bigger part in public policy than they have up to now. I think when you take the stats projections, about 40% of the workforce under 40 in New Zealand in 20 years' time will be Maori or Pacific. I think the critical point for your authority is that every authority is going to face this storm and they're going to be different because of the different in age structure, the workforce. I mean, even 20 years ago, it was possible for one of New Zealand's leading demographers to point out that right now, 70% of our local authorities have more people retiring in them from the workforce than coming into the workforce. And I'm going to present you some figures of what actually did happen in the last decade. The other thing is that what characterized population change 20 years ago in terms of traditional models of looking at the age structure, assuming fertility rates and death rates, is not going to be relevant for forecasting in now or in 20 years' time because of those other influences. And these structural effects already affect the adaptability of health, education, and housing. So we've now got really different and distinct investment risks we've got 200 billion of infrastructure investment in New Zealand in the next 20 years, according to the Infrastructure Commission. As I sat down with the infrastructure management a while ago, they pointed out to me that if we misplace 10% of it, then that means we're paying 200 billion for only 180 billion worth of benefits. So who will pay the extra 20 billion? As I mentioned, we've got, with the population aging, can we really build 3-story townhouses if 45% of our population growth is 75 and over? We know that we've got huge issues of climate change, disaster recovery, and we're going to see a mobility and migration of the population. So again, we need to understand the influences on that. So I'm just making the point that in places, in different localities, the things that are going to drive change are very different than they were 50 years ago. We've already seen, have we not, land use changes. 50 years ago, when we had 76 million sheep in New Zealand, we've now gone down to about 23, 22 million, and we're seeing pasture used for sheep, now used for dairying in some places, used for growing pine trees in other places. And all of those things have a huge influence on the employment, the school populations, the needs for servicing those populations, or the loss of valuable infrastructure that's no longer needed because pine trees don't need quite as much as support as people do. So I've sort of emphasized that the infrastructure issues. We're going to, as I mentioned, we will have this decline in taxable capacity, and we're already seeing the workforce issues in critical occupations like police, nursing, military. You know, my father was a truck driver and retired about 50 years ago. He'd be amazed that we needed to import truck drivers. So we're certainly discovering an unplanned response to population change is causing us to have huge disruptions across many different occupations in New Zealand. And I guess I'd say we don't really think about this deeply enough in terms of planning. We have had one major response, of course, is that our labour force participation of people 65 and over is now basically the second highest in the OECD. And I'll present a couple of charts on that shortly. Just a little bit, if I look at the Bay of Plenty districts, for example, you can see there the populations that each of them, the largest population in Tauranga, you're still having people, the workforce growth, you're having growth in the population 0 to 14 and 75 and over, but every other part of the district is showing from the demographic statistics of Stats New Zealand that you had fewer people in the entrance to the workforce ages than were in the retirement ages. And what's interesting, both Tauranga and Apotiki, the two where you're seeing growth in 0 to 14-year-olds larger than the growth in the 75 plus population, which is quite rare in New Zealand at the moment. But that's an element of significance. But even this little chart just gives you an idea of some of the differences that you can see, but you'll know your own statistics far better than me. When I look at how you compare with other territorial local authorities.
Can I just ask a question, Len,
Yeah,
and
sure.
other people may have questions. So in terms of the growth of the 0 to 14-year-olds in Tauranga and Apotiki, do we know why is that unusual for Aotearoa, and why do we know why those are unique like that?
Well, we have the Maori I think there will be two explanations for that. The Maori population, I'll just get that, has higher fertility and the Pacific population than the European population, and it will depend a bit on the population mix. But also, when people migrate for employment, they tend to bring their families with them, and so you've got those two factors will be influencing that.
So I suppose that leads me to supplementary, which is, do you think there's a shift in Tauranga City from it being this, sort of very much known as a retirement town to a city where there is more, rapidly expanding migration into the city of, young families, and that demographic is shifting enough to see these figures like that. Is that what's causing that shift in Tauranga, do you think?
I think it's something you really need to investigate in more detail. But the Tauranga, as I'll show you later when I compare you with the other territorial local authorities, you've got a quite distinct pattern. And so the national statistics and the explanations need to be dug into more deeply for Tauranga to understand that growth. But you are a little bit of an outlier in that your dynamism is coming from both migration, it's coming from population fertility. You've got an aging population, but it's not dominating the growth that you've got. So you're a really interesting case. And as I mentioned before, each of our territorial local authorities almost have a distinct pattern of growth, and you show that more than most. I'll give you another one later on of Papakura, which actually doubled in size between 2013 and 2023, and nearly all the growth, the European population stayed pretty much exactly the same. The bulk of the growth was either Asian ethnic group, Pacific ethnic group, and a large part also was Maori, and a huge part of that was migration into Papakura. You could not have predicted that. If you had sat down as a town planner in Papakura in 2013, you would not have had a dog show of working out who the population in Papakura was going to be in 2023 with the existing ways that we monitor population change. So if I get on, I'll just show you a little bit the more broader. This is the 27 local authorities grouped together. And what I've grouped them is by size. And you can see Tauranga on the left, the far left, you've got both a high degree of population growth in the green is growth in 0 to 14-year-olds, and also in the older population. And you've got this balance there. You come down to Rotorua, where you've got much less growth from fertility or older people. You then come down to, oh gosh, what's that one? I'll just remind myself. I think that is the Western Bay of Plenty, and that's Taupo, the fourth one from the right, and then you've got a Potiki and Kawerau on the far left, and you can see that these different authorities are moving quite differently. If I actually then map onto that, the labour force exits and entrance on the red line, again, you can see how Tauranga is quite different in that the net effect is strongly positive in terms of labour force entrance. And so the sort of population structure and change in Tauranga you really need to look at other factors other than those usually used in population projections to work out what's going on. But that and so in a way, the red line gives you an indication. If you do depend on migrant growth for workers coming in, this is the competition you've got as a local authority in terms of what's happening. And you've got Waitemata there, you can see a huge decline, loss of workforce for some reason or other, which I'm not sure of, in those authorities. I guess the part of this is I really want to point out that to understand your region in the future, as well as having the measures that are produced by Statistician New Zealand, you and other local authorities need to think a bit more about how do you monitor some of the key bellwethers of population change. For example, the school populations. If you look at this chart, there's obviously a much greater the dynamism in the changing populations of schools around New Zealand than there certainly was when I was at school in the 50s in the post-war baby boom, where pretty much every school classroom went from 30 to 40 kids That's how we managed it. In this situation we've got now, we're going to have unused teaching resources in large parts of the country without pupils, and we're going to have a lot of places where there will not be enough schools, enough classrooms. And so we're going to see, just teaching as a good example of public resources that are generally hard to move, assumed to be a lot more dynamic in how they move around the country than they actually are. So I think places are going to have to contribute much more to the information base that these organisations have. I don't know whether that's helpful to you, but it's sort of, I think, both looking at your own statistics, but placing you in that sort of scale of change that's happening more generally is possibly helpful in terms of how you challenge the government statistician, at least in the information that they're providing. I've also just
thank you, Len. We'll just pause there a second. I think we have a few questions. Councillor Thurston.
Yeah, Len, Lyle Thurston. I'm a Rotorua constituency councillor, and I think this is one of the most staggering slides I think I've ever seen. But it really paints a pretty grim picture for my colleagues in Tauranga and the Western Bay, but it's nothing that we didn't already know. But as you know, we had commissioners here in Tauranga up until recently, and I always remember Commissioner Selwood telling us at a regional transport committee meeting that it's a figure I've never forgotten, that there were 8,000 people moving to live in Tauranga each year. So looking at your graph, is he actually out by a couple of thousand? Like, is it over 10,000? It's between 10 and 12,000, would you say, that are moving to live in Tauranga?
I think, don't forget, my green is just the growth of 0 to 14-year-olds. Okay. So if you add that to the total population growth, and that's, I mean, I do have those figures, but not immediately. But if you look at that, that could well be correct. This, as I say, this is just the 0 to 14-year-olds coming in, and they would, I don't know, roughly 20% of the population. I don't know the source of Commissioner Selwood's statistics, but it's a figure I've never forgotten, that there are 8,000 people annually move to live in Tauranga. And the other figure I always remember him quoting was that there are 8,000 people each day on the move, moving to work in Rotorua, moving to work in Whakatane and coming back the other way. But no, this is a staggering slide, but it certainly paints a picture of the pressure that my colleagues in Tauranga are under with regards infrastructure and catch up. Thanks so much. Right.
Councillor Shirley, just before we move on, thank you. Councillor Shirley.
Yes, hello, Len. Ken Shirley, and good to see you going strong. I was very interested in your comment about the census and the importance of census data, and you posed a number of questions in your paper there. And one question you posed is, why did the 2023 census provide the same results as 2018, but at twice the price per household surveyed? And we sort of know the scandal of the Waipira Trust and some of the other issues around that, but what went wrong with Stats New Zealand? Because it wouldn't have happened on your watch, I'd have to say, when you were government statistician. So, it's pretty important to have confidence in the integrity of the data, but clearly something's seriously wrong there.
Well, can I say, Ken, that firstly, the 2018 census was a failure because the then government statistician, who had no background in statistics, decided that everyone will fill in forms by Wi-Fi, but she forgot that the first job of a census enumerator is to go around every part of New Zealand and make sure that where people actually exist, then census forms are delivered. You can't just rely on what the postman's address lists. So the special thing about a census is not only the information that you gather, but the fact that once every 5 years, we find, for public information purposes, exactly where everyone actually stays. That wasn't done in 2018. And unfortunately, the external review, which we never got a chance to question the people on it before they left the country, never picked that up. So that same problem occurred in 2023. Also, unfortunately, that government with David Clark, who wasn't the brightest Minister of Statistics we've ever had, actually gave the Department of Statistics a target of 90% coverage of the census. Now, it's like telling the drover's dog only bring in half the sheep. It was pretty stupid. I do make the point that the ministers of finance that were around when I worked, either Ruth Richardson or Bill Birch or Gordon Brown, all known for being bloody miserly, would have had my guts for gaiters if I spent twice as much on something that had been done for a similar price for 100 years. So I'm just amazed that neither the current Minister of Finance or Grant Robertson bothered to take an interest in it. Or just a cheeky comment, but you know, I can assure you I've been done over for minor excesses of public expenditure. So it's still not really been properly investigated.
No.
I shouldn't have deviated
Thanks, Len.
into a bit of a grump there.
Oh, that was very interesting.
Thank you, Len.
Right, so what I've just done is order the exits by size, and you can see that the number of people leaving the workforce by those authorities is very, very different. And you can just see the sheer scale of workforce decline around New Zealand. I'll just move on to that. So just give you a quick overview of what is driving population change. These are the age-specific fertility rates, and the one on the 1962 is a sort of both the peak of the post-war baby boom, but also the turning point in terms of the arrival of the pill. And also we were beginning to see a shift in the first part-time participation of women in the workforce. And so that change occurred quite significantly right through the 60s and 70s. We had a fairly static period, but what happened for 20 years was a huge shift in who was having babies. And you can see that the age of having children actually rose more from the under 25 to being 25 and over 30 and 35-year-old. And the interesting thing is that in the last period, for the last 15 years or 10 years, we've seen a decline such that a woman is now more likely to have a baby between 40 and 44 years than under 19. Imagine Burt Walker if he saw that. But so fertility rate has changed quite dramatically. And we also know that the Maori population has its babies younger generally, in their 20s, the Pakeha population in their 30s. And over 100 years, that means that you get 4 times the number of babies, four lots of babies if you're Maori or Pacific, and only 3 if you are European. So again, the fertility rate itself underestimates the scale of population change from fertility. This is just looking at life survivorship, and the charts actually show you the number of people left at particular ages from the birth cohort. And the orange one, in each of those histograms, the orange on the left are those born in the 1930s. The black line is those born, I put that there because that was around when my mother was born. And you can see that by the time her generation got to 80, then barely a sort of 30% of them, 35% of them had got to 80. Whereas the red line, which is my generation, then you can see that 65% of us, the blue line at 80, are going to get to 80. And you just show that gap, the gap between the black line and the red line, dotted line, gives you an indication of the huge scale of change that's occurred just basically in one generation. And then you get to the purple line, which is the next generation, and that change isn't quite so much. But what we're experiencing over the next 20 years is that huge shift in life expectancy of people 75, and as I mentioned, in people 75 and over. And what's interesting is when you analyse fiscally, of course, by the time you get to 80, the average health costs of someone 80 and over are about twice that of a national superannuation payment. So you can start to see the fiscal effect of that. This is the thing that demographers enjoy. I'm not sure whether you, but this is the impact on the age distribution of New Zealand. And you can see that the blue line, which is people aged 0 to 14, is pretty much totally unchanged over that whole period, 91 to 72. And if I'd done this from 1960, it would have been about the same. 1970, it would have been unchanged. And what you're seeing also at that bottom, the turning point between the red and the yellow, is that in around 10 years' time, we'll have more people 75 and over than 65 to 75. So that will be a significant shift. And again, in about 15 years' time, the average age of the workforce will be higher. It will be 40 to 64 years, and there'll be more people of that age than there is between 15 and 39. And so these are quite significant structural shifts that we're seeing. What I think is more interesting is what I've done is I've imposed on that the growth in the population 75 and over. And you can see that from about 2024, the pale blue line is actually the growth, the share of the population growth that is people 75 and over. So 45% of population growth over that whole period is people 75 and over. And so this will...
Do you have, sorry, Len, do you have stats on retirement age, you know, how that's changed people working later in life?
Yes, I can get, in fact, I'll pop down to that now. Where am I here? This chart gives you an indication of how once the Michael Cullen, Ruth Richardson changes came in, you can see, for example, that yellow line of 65 to 69, how it's changed all the way up to now be 50% from being under 20%, right up to 1999. And for women, we're seeing a very similar shift. And of course, the red line is people 70 and over, and we're also seeing quite a shift there. In fact, I remember in the 90s publishing the labour force survey. Every quarter, you could see the impact of the shift each quarter in the retirement age and the age of eligibility to New Zealand Super. And it affected the labour force figures pretty much automatically each time. It's probably one of the rare examples when we had an official statistic that allowed you to monitor almost in real time the impact of a public policy. We're also seeing this impact of 60 to 64 years that is marked there as well. And so you've now got people 60 to 64 employed at a similar rate to 20 to 25-year-olds. So this response has been quite marked, and it is an indication. I mean, we would never have anticipated this. For example, when National Super came in the in 1977, for the next decade, the labour force participation of people 60 to 64 actually fell. It was down about 16%. And so what we've seen here is really quite a remarkable population response to a policy change.
Can I just, I'm just trying to get my head around this graph and the previous one you showed. The previous one you showed appears in about 20 years' time to have the population aged 40 and above, 40 to 64, to be rising, not dramatically, but to have overtaken the under 40-year-olds. Then I look at that and I see the participation rate in post 64-year-olds, and then I'm concerned about the impact of the superannuation and whether it's affordable. is if we get past, am I reading this right? If we get to 20 years' time, if we can afford that, we'll probably be okay, or is there something I'm really missing?
Well, I have a wee chart here where what I did just a tick. What I've basically assumed the same wage rates and costs in terms of per capita costs in terms of health from a Treasury fiscal incidence study. And my red there is basically a crude index of the fiscal reduction in the fiscal capacity of the government system if current policies stay the same. And what I'm just pointing out there is that by 2046, we'll have about 34% less taxable capacity than we had in 1991. And still, we've now got about a 15% less taxable capacity, which is the sort of thing bringing the sort of issues that ministers in the last couple of governments have had, either by failing to do anything that they should do or making off the cuff policy decisions. But I mean, this path is quite clear of current policy settings, and this is mirrored, in fact, more accurately done by the Treasury.
Councillor Nees has a question.
Oh, yes, thank you. Just going back to the slide you showed us previous to this one, it's the male and female labour force participation rates, 87 to 22. The one thing that really worries me in that one is the drop of participation of 15 to 19-year-olds. And we know that engagement in schools actually has fallen substantially from after COVID, and now the government's realising that and trying to turn that around by putting a lot more focus on truancy and encouraging children back to school. But that is not a really good picture for our future workforce, I don't believe, because when you have a large cohort that is dropping, that hasn't got the discipline of working, then it's much harder to get them into the habit going forward. But have you got any other comments about that age 15 to 19-year-old cohort?
Well, when I was a lad, that generation many of them would either have been in apprenticeships, or often would be in apprenticeships or some kind of technical training. And we of course completely that government didn't do a lot for perpetuating the trade training, and we've of course done very little to remedy that. And I guess the farce over our polytechnic management in the last few decades reinforces that. As we've turned our polytechnics into universities rather than trade training establishments, we've possibly lost a really critical vehicle for connecting to people whose aspirations and abilities were not going to take them to university. I think that I would certainly agree with you that the 15 to 19 is as significant as any of the other changes.
Okay, we have a few more minutes. We have a question from Councillor MacDonald. Oh no, okay. So thank you, Len. We've got just a few more minutes.
Yeah. Oh, do you want me to finish? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, please. Sorry. Yeah, there wasn't a question there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Let me just just a couple of little points. Firstly, if we think about the type of investment where public trust is important, I mean, these are the areas where we're going to see population change having a huge impact on public investment that's not actually completely flexible. And so I've just raised those there. I'll leave these with you because I've got the slides. But what I've then done is just simply looked at, if you look at each of the populations you've got, then there are some areas where births and deaths are high and low. Migration is high or low. And what I put in red, it really means that the existing statistical system isn't helping you forecast what's going to happen in your area without a lot of additional monitoring of things that you all know about more than central government. And the I guess with the orange of Kawerau and Taupō is also, you've got high migration and how you track that. And again, you've got higher births in the Pōtiki and the Western Bay of Plenty. And then you've got Rotorua, which has an element of stability, which may well fit more readily the sort of population change models that we produce in central government. But I'm just suggesting that the other three have got a degree of dynamism in the population that might require you to look a bit more deeply about how you forecast population changes, particularly given that living arrangements are extremely important in forecasting future household numbers. And I'll just flick through. I had one cheeky comment on statistics, is that it's important to recognise that people that produce statistics are generally not well aware of the use of them. So the key users need to be very aggressive in identifying what they actually do with the information. And I would argue in New Zealand, having worked in the UK, that our users of statistics really take insufficient interest. If I made a minor change in British statistics, I'd have 4 people banging on my door. In New Zealand, I used to have about 12 people, Brian Easton, Ian Paul, and a few others took a really deep interest in statistics, but most people just trusted the government statistician to get on with it. And I suppose my final conclusion is just a wonderful cartoon from David Lowe, in that sense of it's not our end of the boat that's sinking, so we don't need to worry about it.
Well, thank you very much, Len. That's been a real eye-opener, I think, for all of us. Do we have any final questions for Len? Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's not a question, but just picking up on some of Len, Malcolm Campbell here, a regional councillor, but was 21 years as the Mayor of Kawerau. So I know what it's like to go through hell and high water. And just a couple of things that you brought up about the census, for a start, was an absolute failure in our area. And once they took people from knocking on doors, and they were generally locals, who actually could sort out when there was 2 or 3 families living in sheds in the backyard, that's been a big negative for us. The other one is for our Maori population, which is 60%, a lot of them actually went undetected, mainly because of mistrust in the system. For whatever reason, I'm not knocking it, not knocking the people, but it was the way it was conducted was an issue, and they were not on our census. But as you can see, our population actually went from about 5,800 when Natalie Jackson come in there and told us we were turned into zombie towns, and now it's up to 7,600. Back to getting in line with what it was in its heyday of about 8,800. So, but yeah, look, I wish the hell you were around in those days when I was the Mayor of Kawerau, to be honest. But it's just that's what it is, and I just hope that the government of the day put some real onus on our stats coming forward, because at present we're using stats that are probably 5 years out of date even now. So it's a little bit of an issue for all of us. But thank you for that, and a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just conclude it? And from 1986, when we took over the census from enumeration from the post office, to 2013, the census enumerators were local. And you won't believe this, but nearly half of the enumerators in one census had done a previous census. So they knew the areas, they knew the place. We got rid of that model in 2018 and never went back to it in 2023. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Len. That's great. Thanks very much for coming in.
Okie doke. Thank you. Bye. How do I?
Bye.
I just want to get out of here.
All right. So, and Len, you may be interested to stay for this actually, because it's quite linked to your work.
Right.
This next item. So I think you will find it interesting. So